There's a new idea on the table to fight digital arrest scams in India, a kill switch. The government is examining whether video calls, the very tool fraudsters use to intimidate victims, can be automatically disrupted after a certain duration. But here's the twist: Telegram, Meta, and Google are opposing the proposal. Hello and welcome to The Print. I'm Vrinda Tulsian, and in this video, I'll explain what this proposed kill switch is, why big tech companies are pushing back, and what the center has now told the Supreme Court in a status report filed the Ministry of Home Affairs on digital arrest scam. Let's begin with the first and the biggest development: the kill switch proposal. If you've followed cybercrime trends in India over the past year, you have likely heard of digital arrest. Fraudsters impersonate police officers, CBI officials, ED officers, and sometimes even judges. They call victims on WhatsApp, Telegram, or other messaging apps. They accuse them of being involved in money laundering, drug trafficking, or national security offenses. And then comes the psychological traps. Victims are kept on long, uninterrupted video calls. They are told they are under digital arrest. They are instructed not to disconnect, not to inform family, not to leave the room. And during these prolonged sessions, sometimes lasting hours or even days, they are coerced into transferring money. This isn't a small scale fraud. The amount involved run into thousands of crores, and the Supreme Court is now directly monitoring the government's response through a suo motu writ petition. It is in this context that a kill switch proposal was discussed. In January, the Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology, or as we call it METI, convened a meeting of a committee formed under the Supreme Court's directive. The committee includes government representatives, telecom authorities, law enforcement agencies, messaging platforms, and the court appointed amicus curiae. One of the ideas examined was introducing time based disruption of video calls. In simple terms, automatically breaking a call after a fixed duration. The logic is straightforward. Digital arrest scams rely on prolonged psychological control. If the call automatically drops after a certain time, that control is interrupted. The victim gets a moment to breathe, to think, to reach out. But according to a status report filed by MHA before the Supreme Court, major platforms, Telegram, Meta, and Google, have opposed this proposal. Their objections are on record. They argue that time based disruption may not be effective. Criminals can simply reconnect, switch platforms, or adapt their methods. At the same time, such a blanket intervention could disrupt legitimate users. Long business meetings, remote medical consultations, online court hearings, cross border family calls. In other words, the platforms are saying a blunt technical restriction may inconvenience millions without actually stopping organized fraud networks. So, what we are seeing here is an emerging regulatory friction. On one side, the government looking for structural technology based solution. On the other, platforms warning against product level redesign that could have global implication. The Supreme Court is being kept informed. Consultations are ongoing. No final decision has been taken. But this debate over whether the state can or should redesign communication architecture to prevent fraud is clearly intensifying. Now, the second part: Aratai, WhatsApp, and non compliance, what the status report says. Let's move on to the second development. In its submission, the MHA has told the court that on 28 November last year, directions were issued by the Department of Telecommunications to all telecom identifier user entities, or TIUES, providing app based communication services in India. These include WhatsApp, Telegram, Signal, and notably Zoho's Made in India app, Aratai. The directions required two things. First, SIM binding, meaning the app should function only when the original and active SIM card used for registration is physically present in the device. Second, time bound session controls, particularly for web and desktop logins, so that sessions automatically log out after a defined period. According to the report, however, these platforms are yet to comply. The center has placed this non compliance on record once again before the Supreme Court. It further states that METI has been informed to take up the matter with intermediaries for time bound action, and a separate meeting with WhatsApp is to be held at the level of Union Home Secretary. Why is this interesting? The inclusion of Aratai is especially notable. This app has previously been publicly endorsed by union ministers as a secure and a Swadeshi alternative. But in the affidavit, it is listed alongside global platforms as having not yet complied with the 28 November direction. This tells us two things. First, the government is framing this as a compliance issue across the ecosystem and not a foreign versus Indian platform debate. Second, the Supreme Court is now formally seized of the question of implementation. This brings us to the third strand of the story from a submission by the Department of Telecommunications. And the submission is quite candid. The DOT has told the Supreme Court that it functions primarily as a regulatory body. It does not have independent investigative powers for misuse of telecom resources and cyber fraud. It acts on information received from law enforcement agencies. At the heart of the problem, the DOT says, is SIM misuse. The affidavit refers to forged KYC document, mule SIMs, where individual obtain SIMs legally and then hand them over for fraudulent use, bulk corporate connections, and illegal SIM boxes. It also flags what is called a core technical gap. App based platforms verify users through a one time password or what we call as OTP linked to a mobile number. But once that verification is done, the account can continue operating indefinitely, even if the SIM is removed, deactivated, or taken abroad. This, the DOT says, allows fraudsters sitting outside India to operate Indian number based accounts with extremely low traceability. The department has placed data before the court. Over 11 lakh SIM cards have been blocked based on police inputs. AI based tools have led to the disconnection of 86 lakh mobile connections suspected to have been obtained using forged documents. More than 5,000 point of sale agents have been blacklisted. At the same time, the DOT has informed the court that it is finalizing the Telecommunications User Identification Rules 2025. These rules, once notified, are expected to provide a statutory framework for biometric based identification and more effective capping of SIMs per individual across telecom providers. In a sense, the DOT's affidavit is making two arguments. One, enforcement action is ongoing. Two, structural regulatory gaps and limited statutory powers are hampering more proactive intervention. In conclusion, so when you put all three developments together, a larger picture emerges. The government is pushing for structural changes, SIM binding, session limits, possibly even a kill switch. Platforms are resisting blanket technical redesign. And the DOT is telling the court that its regulatory toolkit is limited. At stake is not just cybercrime enforcement, but the architecture of digital communication itself. How much should the state be able to redesign platforms to prevent fraud? Where does user convenience end and public safety begin? And who ultimately decides, the executive, the platforms, or the Supreme Court? The conversation is now unfolding in the court and it is far from over. That's all from me. I'm Vrinda Tulsian. You're watching The Print.